Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Lewis Speaks 2024, and today I want to explore some of the reasons why adult children and their parents have a very difficult time relating to one another, especially in this day and age. I've noticed that recently a lot of adult children have been complaining that they have not been relating to their parents, and there seems to be this strained relationship and this conflicted relationship that exists between adult children and their parents. And so I want to kind of go over some of those reasons. First, there's a generational gap. Adult children and their parents have at least a 20-year, in some cases, a 20-year generational gap. And I think as children, we are oftentimes tasked with the responsibility of breaking generational curses. Oftentimes, our parents, they grew up one way and they become stuck in their ways and stuck in these mindsets. And as the newer generation, we are learning new ways on how to interact with people, on how to do certain things. And we try to bring our innovation into the rigid mindsets of our parents, and they are so stuck in their ways they can't make room for the possibility of something new. And so oftentimes that leads to a disconnect, and that leads to tension. This unwillingness to see that there is other perspectives, other modalities, other ways of doing things. And I think that as you get older, you get very set in your ways. Your thinking becomes fixed and you become very rigid in your thinking. And the younger generation, they're more mutable, they're more fluid in their thinking. And so they're able to incorporate new things into their minds, into their schema. And so here you have a younger generation that's able to absorb and apply new principles, new skills, and you have an older generation that is more stuck on the tried and true. So this is where the tension overlaps, you know? So that's one reason, the generational gap. I think also another reason is the lack of respect on both parts, the mutual lack of respect, younger children, adult children of parents, they oftentimes think that they know everything when they don't. They're trying to find their own autonomy, their own voice, and in trying to carve out their own voice, they can at times become very disrespectful towards their parents. And I think also parents don't respect their child's right to their own journey. They don't respect their child's right to their own life. Their child has a life independent of what they once had with the parent. And the parent is not making room for that. Oftentimes, parents can be very overbearing. They can have these unrealistic expectations that they project onto their children. And that leads to a lot of tension and conflict, especially when the child is trying to break free from that controlling, oppressive environment that the parent insists on providing, under the guise of showing love and care, but sometimes it could be too much. And it's a lack of respect for the child's autonomy, and this is what causes oftentimes the children, the adult children, to break free, to rebel, because they're trying to find their voice, they're trying to find their truth. And you can't find your truth if you're always living in the shadow of your parents, if you're always living for the approval of your parents. You cannot find your truth and your life. And so it's that lack of respect. I think also parents in some households, they got used to talking to their kids a certain way. And as you get older, you have to learn that your adult child does not respond to the same, the same behavior and the same communication style that way. You know, you have to learn a different way of talking to your child, your adult child, because what's going to happen is it's going to come across as disrespectful, condescending, like you're talking down to them. And while you may have wisdom that you want to impart to them, oftentimes that wisdom gets lost because of how it's communicated. And so once again, it's that lack of respect, that mutual lack of respect. I think adult children, in their effort to break free, can be very inconsiderate and thoughtless of the parents' need to provide guidance, care, and concern, which brings me to a third reason why there's conflict between adult children and their parents, and that's because of the shifting roles. As both parties get older, the adult children, they begin to try to find their identity. They want to spread their wings. They want to test the waters. And parents are so typecast in the role of being parents that they can become overprotective, overbearing. As children get older, parents move from the role of parent into the role of advisor, guidance counselor. They don't necessarily have to tell their child what to do anymore. They more so try to guide them, and I think some parents, they get typecast in the role of dictating what their child should do and how their child should behave, and that results in a tension, of a conflict. It results in the child just turning away, wanting to go in the opposite direction as a way to gain their own sense of freedom and independence. And that's a necessary part of their development. When you think about it, when you think about adolescence is a time where children tend to rebel because they're trying to find their own sense of independence. And this is necessary because ultimately the tables will turn, and it's going to be the adult child that becomes the caretaker to the parent, usually in traditional development roles. The adult child will begin to take on more of a parental role with the parent and begin to make decisions regarding their care, regarding so many different things, and so the parent is going to need a strong advocate. They're going to need someone who can vocalize their concerns, especially when they cannot. As we know, age tends to take things away. And so the parent is going to need a strong advocate, and this is why you raise your children to be that, And you have to respect that. You have to respect that there's going to be a shift in roles, And I think oftentimes that puts fear in the parent's heart, and that makes them feel uncomfortable, especially when they've been so used to taking care of this child for so long. And now it feels as though their role is changing. That could become scary. That could bring up feelings of confusion, sadness, fear, anger, frustration, grief, And that's something that the parent has got to negotiate if they want to maintain a strong, positive relationship with their adult children. So that's one reason why adult children and parents have that disconnect. Another reason is oftentimes the communication is terrible. Instead of words of affirmation, there's words of ammunition. And what do I mean when I say words of ammunition? Oftentimes, parents will use the confessions of their children as ammunition against them. They'll bring up old wounds and old confessions that will ultimately erode the trust system. They'll say things that are really hurtful. You know, the thing about it is this: as an adult child, you know that your parents can press certain buttons within you. Hell, your parents installed half those buttons. So they know what buttons to push to get you to do things. They know what buttons to push to get you angry, to get you frustrated. They know what buttons to push. As I mentioned before, they've created some of those buttons. And so knowing that, it charges the parent with the responsibility to be mindful and considerate of their child, you know? And that's both parties, because children can also be inconsiderate with their parents. The way that they talk to their parents can be very, very just abrasive and harsh and cruel, you know? So that's mutual. That's both the adult child and the parent. So yeah, that's what causes that disconnect, those words of ammunition as opposed to loving words of affirmation. I think also the disconnect comes from the inability to really speak about old hurts and old pains without the parent feeling as though it's a betrayal. You know, there's a lot of things that go right in your childhood and a lot of things that go horribly wrong. And you need a safe space to actually bring that up without it making the parent feel as though they were not a good parent, as though they were somehow deficient. I think in some situations, there might have been some parents who've neglected and abused their children. And so it's difficult to hear. It's going to be difficult to hear that. But the thing about accountability and responsibility is that you have to be prepared to hear that. You also have to be prepared to apologize and make amends for those areas where you were not such a great parent. And I think many parents, they struggle with this. They struggle with low ego strength. They're unable to really tolerate the truth about how the neglect, the abuse might have undermined their child's development. They struggle with hearing that. And I think that as a parent, you have got to be willing to hear how certain aspects of your children's childhood was not always the best. You got to be okay with hearing that. And I think a lot of children, especially adult children, they won't be able to tell their truth until their parent makes the transition from this earth. They won't be able to fully tell their truth because there's a lot of parents who cannot handle that truth. It creates feelings of guilt and shame. And as I mentioned before, they just don't have the ego strength to handle that. You know, their ego caves in and it causes them to feel angry and to blame and project blame onto other people, and especially children. You know, they project blame onto these children. And to be honest, it wasn't the child's fault. You know, it's not the parents' fault either in some cases. But you got to take accountability for how you showed up, you know, when you were a parent to this young child. You have to take accountability. And I think that that's really, really key, you know, to build that sense of trust. And that leads me into my next point. And the next reason why adult children and parents have this disconnect is because of the lack of trust. You know, there are numerous examples, and I'll say on my family, there are numerous times where my trust has been violated and my trust has been broken. There have been numerous breaches of trust within my family of origin. And because of that, it eroded the trust system. And it made me feel like certain members of my family were not safe spaces. And I think when you talk about parents and their adult children, there's a lot of broken trust. There's a lot of old hurts. There's a lot of unspoken wounds and resentments that still are buried underneath the surface. And I think a large part of counseling and family counseling is starting to unearth and exhume the wounds. Just all those wounds that were buried, you have to dig them up and you have to make peace with them. Because a lot of times we are just expected to stuff our emotions, suppress our emotions, suppress the past. Oh, that happened in the past. That happened in the past. Leave the past in the past. But here's the thing. Feelings buried alive never die. If you bury the past, that does not mean that it's gone. If anything, it can come back later to wreak havoc on your life if it's not addressed. Feelings buried alive never die. They just come back in other ways, and they tend to bleed out into other facets of your life, especially when they have not been addressed. And so I think that when it comes to trust, parents have got to be willing to hear, as I mentioned before, they've got to be willing to hear the many ways in which they were not such great parents. They have got to be willing to listen and offer that apology and try their best to make amends. And I think that that's what's missing in a lot of these parent-child relationships. Parents tend to do the child wrong and then be like, well, get over it. Get over it. Get over it. And vice versa. Children tend to do their parents wrong and they just feel like, well, I was young. Yeah, but what are you doing to make amends? Have you apologized for that? What have you done to make amends? Have you asked your child or even the parent, what can I do to make amends? And in some toxic families, parents will oftentimes try to blame children. And a lot of times, children, I'll just say this. As a parent, you have more influence, you have more knowledge than your kid. And so, because of that, you are held to a higher standard. Children are children. They're still learning how to figure things out. And while that's not a license or get out of jail free card for the kid, they definitely have to be held accountable too. You also have to realize at the same time, parents have a better understanding of things as they have more experience. They've been here longer, they know certain things, and so they're held to a higher standard. It's not a child's job to take care of a parent. It's not a child's job to raise a parent. And I think that's where also the disconnect comes in, because some parents are emotionally immature and they never seem to want to grow up. Some parents are narcissistic. Some parents struggle with mental health issues that interfere with their ability to be a full, present, healthy parent. And so there's so many different scenarios that can really, really undermine the trust system. And I think personally, parents have got to take accountability. They have got to take accountability because, as I mentioned before, they're held to a higher standard. They have more experience. At a certain age, you should know certain things, And it's the parent's job to take care of the child, not the opposite. My mother used to tell me growing up, I had you. You didn't have me. And I say that right back. You had me. I didn't have you. And so I'm holding you to a standard. But I think that's why also there's that disconnect. Because certain parents are not willing to play their position and children are not willing to play their position. And sometimes as a child, you can't always play your position because you have to take care of, or so you feel, you have to take care of your parent. So it's frustrating. It's definitely frustrating, you know? Um, I think another reason why there is a disconnect is because of power and control issues. There are some parents who cannot relinquish control and they want to always keep their children underneath their thumb. They want to always manipulate their kids and always have that power over their kids. And when kids are trying to grow up and develop and learn their identities and trying to test their wings and test the waters, that power and control is not going to fly. It's not going to fly. If anything, it's going to cause the child to rebel and go in the opposite direction. You know, I've seen so much estrangement between parents and their adult children, and I've asked myself so many times, why? And it's because of that lack of respect. It's because of the parent always trying to maintain control over the child and not allowing the child to realize their full potential, not allowing the child to actually grow, trying to stifle and suppress the child's voice, and always trying to undermine the child's intuition and growth. And oftentimes that becomes frustrating, especially as you grow up. And we have to remember, you know, as adult children, we are seeing so many different things. We're trying to learn how to navigate not only our own emotions, but also relationships. We're trying to navigate work and those dynamics. We're trying to navigate being caretakers to our parents. We're starting to see our parents who were once the strong, virile, just healthy individuals, our rocks. We're starting to see our rocks crumble. And that's a very, very traumatic experience, especially for an adult child. When you start to see your parent gradually degrade into later adulthood, it becomes hard to witness, especially when all your life you saw this person as your rock, your hero. You know, so that's a really difficult thing. And parents, they're going through an entirely different thing too. They are facing health challenges. They're noticing certain shifts and change in their hormones and in their bodies. And they're starting to break down gradually and degrade. And so they're going through a lot too. They're seeing, you know, they're asking themselves certain questions, you know? They're going to a phase of life which is called what? Ego, it's Erickson, according to Erickson, ego integrity versus despair, where they start to examine their life and they start to wonder if they made a difference. And they have all these existential questions that are probing and swirling around in their mind. And so they're going through a different process. And it's a very heavy process too, because they're also facing their own mortality. And they're starting to ask themselves certain things and certain questions, and they're starting to grapple with the regrets that they have. And so it can be a lot on them as well. And so I think personally, both adult children and parents need to be very considerate of one another, need to offer kindness, be very gentle with one another, be very considerate. I think they also need to learn how to communicate with one another. They both have got to learn a new language. And I know that for older parents, it can be very difficult to do that when you're so stuck and set in your ways. But when you don't do that, you end up chasing your kids away. When you're not willing to learn that new language and adapt to the many changes that is going on, you struggle. You're gonna have a difficult time. And I think success, especially in old age, is about being able to adapt to the shifting changes and the many changes that you experience. And that's easier said than done, especially when you are just so set in your ways, you know? And so we each have a task. I think adult children, they have got to also do their part, understand that their parent is changing. A lot of the functions that they once enjoyed, be it sight, hearing, walking, tasting, being able to eat certain foods and do certain things, they won't be able to do that. And you have to understand that and temper your expectations accordingly. You know? Being mindful that your parents are changing, you know? As we all are, you know? And that's challenging. That is challenging, you know? But I think with understanding, with empathy, with also spirituality and reliance on God, that'll definitely take us to a different level of understanding. And is it going to be easy? No, it's not going to be easy. But I think it's going to be worth it. I think it's necessary. I think that with mutual understanding, anything can be worked through. You know, but once again, it takes the work of both parties. You know, you can't expect your adult child to just cater. You also, as a parent, you know, you also as an adult child, I mean, you can't expect your parent to always cater. It's not fair. It's about meeting people in the middle. It's about coming to a meeting of the minds. It's about realizing that you won't always agree on certain things and certain ways of handling things, but you also, you know, you leave room for a difference. You sometimes have to agree to disagree. We are two different people. We have two different ways of doing things. We have two different perspectives based on our own individual personalities. And so you have to just leave it at that. And sometimes, you know, it's going to get real heated. The conversations may get real heated. And sometimes you might have to agree to revisit that at a different time when you're both in a different headspace, in a calmer, cooler frame of mind. That's important. But once again, you got to leave room for understanding. You know, that's crucial. So I hope this video was helpful. Definitely, parents and adult children, it can be a rough road. It can be an extremely rough road, but as I mentioned before, with mutual understanding, patience, care, concern, and consideration, you'll definitely be able to navigate this road together. Thank y'all for listening. Peace.